Hello and welcome to Take Your Time, a Persona 5 Royal in real-time podcast where we play in real time the time it takes to play Persona 5 as it takes the time in the game. My name, of course, is Jonathon Dornbush, and I'm joined, as always, by my fellow intrepid Phantom Thief, Tom Marks. Tom, it's good to be here with you.
It's always a pleasure. And just so everyone knows, that I don't think that was rehearsed. That was just impressive. I would have gotten lost in that sentence.
What I like to do is try to trip myself up with improv, because if there's anything more fun than improv, it's improv gone bad. So anyway, of course, this is, as we've mentioned a little bit earlier, we're playing Persona 5 Royal in time with the in-game calendar, because it's a real-life calendar as well. So we're going week by week, day by day, through the Persona 5 Royal calendar. For those who are just joining us, again, if you want to go back and listen, this is a sequentially following podcast, so feel free to start all the way back at the beginning and you'll hear essentially the full journey of the Phantom Thieves, whether or not you're playing along at home or just want to hear how our experiences have been going. This week, of course, is, I think, as best to say, the long-awaited Eminem episode, because it's Midterms and Madarame are coming up this week, and we've got a lot to discuss. But before we do, Tom, I want a pop quiz answer from you.
All right, so last week we asked you, the viewers, what is Mishima's official self-assigned title within the Phantom Thieves for the Phantom Thieves as running the fan site website that he runs. And someone actually did get it in the comments of the YouTube video. I did not pull up the name though.
I have it all up if you'd like me to read the comment.
Please go ahead.
Sasha wrote into the last week's YouTube, thank you for writing into the YouTube, and said, it'll get to the answer, but it's actually a fun fact. Sasha said, my favorite Mishima fun fact is that his name is very similar to the author Yukio Mishima, who wrote a novel that many believe to actually be an autobiography, where the main character is weak, socially awkward, and easy to pick on. Sounds incredibly similar to our pop quiz answer, strategic image management rep, Mishima.
That's correct. That is the correct answer. The strategic image management representative is the full deal, and it is it's a mouthful. It's like this was one of those. That's one of those titles where last week's pop quiz, I literally wrote down the answer, asked the question, and then midway through the week was like, I don't know the answer to that question. Like, if you told me on the spot to say the name, I would not be able to.
for a dude who like came up with the fan site, and which like is a good pun and all this other stuff, his self title is not great.
No, it's a lot,
because like even the acronym of it is like Simmer.
I like that more.
Yeah, okay, our Simmer Mishima. But anyway, I did want to say thank you to everyone who wrote in on last week's episode. We also have a viewer question that I want to get to in a little bit, but of course I did ask for people to tell us what your Phantom Thieves team names were, and we got a couple good ones. Mitch said name their team the Diamonds. An has a special dialogue thing about liking her choice when you name it that. Cool little Easter egg. Which is very cool. Sam said maybe a bit on the nose, but I named my team Masquerade.
It's another solid one.
Yep, and then...
Now I feel boring. Now I feel like I'm just like, oh, okay.
To be or not to be, being from, I believe, Nier, said, I choose to use the default Phantom Thieves name. The game barely mentions it anyway, so I don't get why the game asks you to create a name. So
that's the camp I'm in. But then at the same time, you said Heart Attack last week, and I was like, oh man, I'm jealous.
I'm still very proud of that. That's honestly, I think, one of the best creative choices I've ever made in my life, which is saying something. But before we get into this week's episode and the events of this week, which is May 10th through May 16th, I did want to read a question which was written into dornology@gmail.com, where you can also write in questions. That's DORNOLOGY@gmail.com. Eric wrote in from Concord and said, hey, loving the show so far. Quick question for you and Tom. Seeing how popular Persona 5 has become, do you think Atlus is going to continue making more games with the world and characters of Persona 5 like they did with P5 Strikers? Or do you think Atlus is ready to move on at this point? Which is an interesting question, because this is, I think, definitely, past Persona games like P4 obviously had Arena, Did the dancing game come out for P4, or am I?
I think so, yeah.
Like there were expansions there, and P5 has as well with strikers and dancing. But like this is definitely the most popular Persona has ever been
by far, right? And that's why I think it's an answer. The answer is both, right? So like, I think there's a reason that like strikers wasn't developed, solely internally, right? Like because they, the people who make it, Omega Force, is like they're known for those action-y type games, but also B, Atlas is not a single studio, right? So they can, or they have resources. So I think it's a mix of both. Is my guess is that like the P5 is so popular, they're probably going to do more stuff with it in whatever form that is, more stuff with those characters that people love. But then also probably I would not be surprised if the workings, wherever it is in the process, the workings of P6 are already sort of like being cooked up, right?
Yeah, I'm sort of the same with you there, and I know that that's sort of a like trying to have our cake and eat it too sort of answer. And like we can definitely talk about this more in the future of like what we think of once we talk about strikers and everything and the totality of Royal, like sort of a full analysis of the Phantom Thieves might be an interesting thing. But I'm totally there with you. Like this group just has such a love from fans that it would seem almost silly on just like a marketing and business level to just be like, all right, they're gone forever, like we're done with them. Like I think they will probably still exist for quite some time, whether that's new games or just other stuff, like who's to say. But like I don't know, there's a P5 stage play in Japan that Andrew Goldfarb went to see. Like this has gotten very big. Like the music is so well beloved. It's sort of a like really, really beloved moment for the series, and I feel like Persona 5 won't end, like the life of these Phantom Thieves won't end even when Persona 6 comes out. And I do wonder what's going on with Yakuza might also affect how they approach it, because now they're sort of getting to do both, turning it into a turn-based series in the mainline versions while also now getting the like original flavor of Yakuza but in a new spin-off series with Judgment. So it's like there's potentially something you can do there where you have almost the Phantom Thieves go on even if Persona 6 happens, but who's to say? We have plenty more of the Persona 5 journey to go through, of course, and that journey this week brings us to everyone's favorite time of year, midterms. Who doesn't love tests that make you study all the time and then decide? Like, man, just to pull it back a little bit, I remember like final exams and midterms just being the end all be all. Like, it is incredible the amount of emotional weight that went into those moments. And now I don't have tests. Like, it's wonderful to not have tests. And so it's a little bit weird to go back into this week and be like, oh yeah, I need to study and I need to think about these things. But before we get there, and I'm also pulling up my notes. Thank you, Tom, by the way, for putting up notes as well. In our run of show, I'm trying to get to this actual week because my notes doc is getting very long these days. Before we properly get to midterms, you sort of have your last chance to study, and also a little bit more of Makoto. Getting pretty, as you put, pretty nosy, being a nosy jerk at the train station. Just isn't subtle about it at all.
Yeah, this Makoto interaction that you have at the train station on Tuesday, May 10th, is really... It continues to drive home that this person is really onto you and really sort of serious about it, or at least presenting herself as very serious about it, and like just a jerk. Like, she's just so like conniving and kind of like mean about it and backhanded about it, and like very strategic still, not loud and boisterous and in your face about it, just like very sort of calculating. And I think it's a really interesting side of this character that you see as how you're introduced to her.
Totally, because all we're getting of her right now is that, and it's she comes up to you and is essentially like, yeah, midterms are pretty stressful. You know what else is stressful? Keeping a major secret about things you've done. Like, that's basically the way she's interrogating. It's like, this is a narc if I've ever seen one. But it's, and you're right, it is a very interesting sort of, a thing this game does of, presenting a very specific look at a character as your first introduction to them. And I don't think, we don't have to spoil anything, but Makoto will be part of the story going forward. And so what happens there will be an interesting look at the character. But from there, just for reference, because you did have a little bit of free time, I went to the park with An. And then I spoke to the orator to finally get him to go to the beef bowl shop. But then I went and studied with Ryuji because it was both friendship and knowledge points, and I didn't want to pass that up.
Totally. I hung out with Ryuji, got him up to level 6 confidant. Nice. Because I'm kind of focusing on him right now mostly. And then since I had previously met up with the politician guy at the beef bowl shop, I then went and listened to his speech, and he recognized me, and that was like the actual sort of like meeting Yoshida, as his name is, moment. Okay. He's still not a confidant, which that's not a spoiler. You know he's going to be a confidant because it says it on the map. Yeah. But I'm making progress towards that.
His is an interesting one, and I'm behind on it, obviously, but I did eventually do it in the base game, and it is an interesting thing of, like, the different requirements for confidant meetings in the game, and I do think it makes a lot of sense just as you were talking about it. It's like, oh yeah, this dude is just a total stranger to you. He has nothing to do with what you're doing specifically, like at school or anything like that, and so it makes sense that it would take some time for you to establish a relationship enough to be a confidant.
It's something like, right, you have to work at the beef bowl shop once, then you have to work at the beef bowl shop again and see him there, and then you have to do this night where you watch him, and then you gotta go see him again, and that's what unlocks the confidant, and it's like, that's 4 evenings you have to spend before you even get to rank 1 with this guy, right? Yeah. And like you said, that makes sense for somebody that is a random adult politician standing on a soapbox in the middle of a Shibuya station is like it's very weird that you, a high schooler, are like, trying to befriend this man. So I guess it should take work.
Absolutely. And I think it also hits home why I probably didn't go after it in the first game, because it probably was like after night 1, I'm like, oh, I don't want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
I just need that hit of like, oh, confidant level going up, not working for friendship. What's that? That's ridiculous.
Right.
Time and effort. Anyway, so that was essentially your last day. So if you did not study enough to get to knowledge level 2, please go make sure you were saving properly. Go back, study a little bit, get to knowledge level 2. It's worth it.
Or accept your fate.
But
dive into the abyss of the unknown. I don't know. Or save scum.
I was a teacher's pet. I studied as much as humanly possible as a kid, so there's no way in hell I would have done that. But yeah, then you get into exams, and this is a funny thing, and I'm almost surprised that... I guess it makes sense as a kid. I was going back and forth while I was playing, and I'm interested to hear what you think. Essentially, the midterms days, you don't really get to do much. It's just midterms.
It really caught me off guard the first time I played, because, it's you don't get a... you get a little bit of this later, but, like, for the bulk of the midterm stuff, and especially in the base game, not in Royal messes with this a little bit in these midterms, which we'll get to, but, yeah, you don't have, like, a walking into class scene. You don't have a going home scene after. It's just you're sitting in the class, you take midterms, you finish the questions for that day, you're immediately like, okay, next day, you're sitting in class ready to answer questions. It's so sudden and so quick, to the point where, May 11th has like a few more questions, but May 12th, I think you answer like 2 questions, and then the day just ends and you go on to the next one. It's super, super sudden.
Yeah.
Which I think is, it's interesting because, like, midterms in my mind when I was young were like a total slog, but I guess in this, the idea is that they're like, it's like a whirlwind of a thing where you're just like going from one to the next and you're just focusing on that. And I like it thematically here, at least.
Yeah, that's where I sort of came down on it. I was like, I kind of wish you would have evenings to do something. But in reality, if I were a kid and I was like really focused on how important these midterms were, and they seem very important at Shujin, I probably would have spent those nights studying. So like it almost makes sense that you wouldn't have those nights, because what are you going to be doing besides, last minute preparations, or unless you're Ryuji, staying up late and playing video games all night as he cops to. One of the mornings, which is very amusing. But
can I just say also that the midterms weeks have one of my other favorite Morgana voice lines in the entire game, which is when you get a question right, and every time you get a question right, Morgana goes, "Oh, we can do this!" Yeah, like every single time.
It's more excited about that than like a battle, practically. Yeah. It's great. Yeah, there's little touches like that are, even when it's repeated, I'm like, oh, it's a cute line. Mm-hmm. So anyway, to sort of go through midterms a little quickly, because they're not too massive. Tom,
Sure.
you and I had talked about basically beforehand of like, oh, should we do something special? Should we like try to, blow out midterms in some way? It's a little hard to, because you also don't want to get midterms wrong.
Right.
And so the tactic you told me that and let me know if you did this for all the days, was essentially like you tried the question, like you picked what your answer was going to be, and then you looked up the right answer.
Yes.
Which is what I did too. I followed in that pattern because I don't want to get it wrong. Like, I don't care if it's cheating. I don't want to get it wrong right now.
Yeah. I had a wiki open, and I would pick what I thought was the correct answer, and then I would check, and then I would say, okay, and I would click the actual correct answer. And in doing that, there's 8 questions spread across the first 3 days of midterms that you have to answer, or like 8 choices to make.
Yeah.
And in that, I only got one of them wrong the entire time.
Same.
And in fact, yay! I don't remember which one I got wrong.
So I got the...
Oh, it was... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It was the first day, because the first day is asking you about Yoshitsune, and I ended up getting the question wrong about like what happened when him and his brother were fighting. I didn't actually know what happened when him and his brother were fighting.
I got the first question wrong. I don't know if it was that one or the one after. I think essentially I had mixed up the brothers.
Gotcha.
And so I did that, and then I looked it up. I was like, oh right, it's the other way around. And then as soon as I knew that, I got the others correct and was totally fine. But yeah, I got all of those right. Otherwise, on the 11th. Got the 2 on the 12th correct, though I totally guessed on the 2nd. I have written down just I absolutely did not know, but I guessed.
Was that the map one?
I think it was the map one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on the 13th, I got the 2 questions right. But as you wrote down in the notes, they are meant to be thematic questions, which is totally a thing I didn't really think about much on my first playthrough. But May 11th are more about an underdog fighting against an oppressive power. And the 12th, perception and cognition. Not subtle at all.
No, yeah. But I do like, one of the things I really do like about the midterms, and we don't have to dwell on this too long, but I like that the questions in class always relate to what's going on to you, but then I like that the midterms are related to the questions that it asked you throughout the term, or throughout the semester, right? But they're not the exact same questions.
Yeah.
I think I dig that, where it's like, and you can't use the Phantom Thief network or whatever to look it up. So it ends up actually making it feel a little bit like an actual exam, because you're not being tested on, the exact pop quizzes you already had. You're being tested on things related to the things that the actual in-game teachers taught you. Yeah. Which is, I think, really cute. I don't know. It's very fun that way. It manages to make just test taking be like actually pretty flavorful in that regard.
Yeah, I guess that's one of my like big critiques about the test taking, and then we can move on, is that like the day by day ones, there are just straight up facts that if you don't know them, you don't know them, and there's no way you could possibly know them unless you looked it up. Like that's like at the end of the day, that's just kind of how some of those questions are. Some are logic based, and some are like if you're paying attention to how they ask you, you can kind of figure it out. But some are just like a shot in the dark. But here, as you said, like the midterms genuinely are like, okay, were you paying attention? Let's find out. And because there are twists on the questions, it's often like, oh yeah, didn't they say this is how that would have happened? Or like, this is why that puzzle makes sense that way. It's totally a formula I really dig. And I wish there was a way to make those other questions feel like that all the time, but I can understand why that's tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's pretty much 3 days of midterms. And then on the 3rd day, we get into a twist for Royal, a thing that is not there in the base game. There is a big student assembly on the 3rd day of midterms. It's like, why the hell are they doing this? Like, all the kids are so mad that it's like in the middle of all of this, they're like, let's take time for... I would have brought a book and been studying the entire time. I would not have been paying attention. But the principal comes out to announce they've hired a therapist. Forgive me about his first name, but is it Takuto Maruki?
I don't know. This is one of those characters where they just like don't say his first name enough for me to ever like understand how it's pronounced.
That's fair. So Maruki is introduced as the new school therapist. I'd like to point out all of the first responses are like, "Damn, son, he's hot." Those are all of the responses from the kids.
The first thing that a kid says when Maruki comes out on stage is you just overhear someone go, "Isn't he hot?" And
yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong.
No, you're not wrong. Like, and I know that is a trope in media of like a hot teacher. Like there are things where it can get wrong. Don't get me wrong, but like I know that is a trope where like kids have a crush on teachers. That never happened to me in real life. I never had a crush on any teacher in my entire life. So I've never been able to like relate to this cliche.
Right.
But anyway, all the kids are like, whoa, he's hot. He tries to be a little bit like relatable.
Yeah.
He also has mic problems. He's not great at like giving a speech in front of everyone. He's like, I'm going to be able to help you all with all your problems. Actually, except for money. Money I can't help you with. That you're kind of on your own. It's like he's rehearsing a little bit of stand-up, which like I guess as a therapist is sort of, you know, stand-up adjacent, just to usually an audience of one. But he's sort of just, you know, letting you know he'll be there as a resource, especially given everything the school's gone through. And afterward, An, Ryuji, and you are talking about the stock and like why it makes sense that like the school had to do something, especially with the media attention they're receiving. Like had they done nothing, it would look pretty bad. So even if this isn't much, like at least it's very clear why he's being hired. And they're kind of talking bad about the guy, and then Maruki just shows up behind them and is like, oh, hi there. It's me, the one you were just saying bad things about. How are you doing?
He's so... I love his introduction because he's so, like, weirdly adorable and clumsy and self-deprecating in a really, like... I think it's very intentional, right? In order to make him feel more approachable, because the idea that they brought in a counselor to talk to the students could be this very sort of, like, confrontational and, like, uncomfortable thing. But the way that they make him just immediately, like, you immediately, like him because he's such a mess, kind of, is just really good. I really like Maruki a lot. And also just the bigger theme. This is a thing that I think is, you know, they added it for Royal, but this is one of those themes that I think is a really incredibly healthy addition to Persona 5 of... You guys are going through some really messed up stuff, and you're high school kids, and the Kamoshida stuff was like not light, and they had a moment to like have everybody talk about it a little bit within the actual Phantom Thieves, but the fact that there's now this outlet in a character for the characters to just talk about like what's going on with them and sort of like talk about their emotions and their feelings and what's happening in their lives is not literally, you know, we are the Phantom Thieves, but like what's going on with Kamoshida and that sort of stuff is really, I think, kind of wonderful. It sends a really good message.
Yep.
It is really like encouraging all of the interactions, and we only see 2 on this day, which is An and then you, but all the interactions with Maruki are generally like really like positive and feel good and helpful. And I think that's such a nice, in a game literally in some regards about mental health, you know, and about like the stuff people go through and traumatic events that physically, like literally change your heart, right? And change who you are. To have a character that's just all about like examining those things is really important, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I think and obviously I don't know where your relationship with him or his importance to the full story goes through, but I absolutely am with you, and I think it's great that it's added, because as you said, like it fits the themes of the game so well, and as an addition, it is such a positively minded one. The representation of him being a little bit of a goofball or like a little sheepish, or I think I wrote down like he's a therapist who I hope also has a therapist, because he makes a lot of like self-deprecating jokes and whatever, and it's like, cheer up about yourself, buddy, I believe in you. But like he's clearly there. At least so far, I don't read him as ill-intentioned. Like, even if the school likely hired him to save their ass, he seems genuinely there to help. And
well,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is like he's kind of trying to bribe you with snacks, but his whole point is he's like, it wouldn't do any good if we made this mandatory for you. So like maybe like, but they told me basically that I gotta counsel you guys, and he's very much recognizing like it's not helpful to make this sort of thing mandatory. And then the school, right after that moment, you have Kawakami, I think it is, just be like, hey, this is mandatory for you, right? And I think that's a really good distinction of, like, the school is doing this because they have to, but Maruki seems to actually be there to, like he gets it a little more, and he's trying to, like, connect with you in a way that's not just like, hey, you have to come do this, you know?
Totally, yeah. His insistence on snacks very much feels like, I know you probably don't want to come for this, because especially obviously I don't know culturally how therapy and stuff is looked at in modern day Japan, but like even today, I think like there's a lot more acceptance of mental health, and the things that we need to do to go for therapy. Like I was someone who was very happy personally when I went to therapy for the first time, but I didn't go until I moved out to San Francisco, and so many people were like, oh yeah, I go to therapy. Like it seemed like a normal thing. It seemed always like a taboo subject. And so I think it is good that the game introduces it, as you were saying, like in a way that feels like they understand the sort of expectations or the thoughts around it. And especially if it comes off as you have to go, no teenager is ever going to really want to go then. And so he tries to bridge that gap, and I think he does it in a good way. And I think then you see that when On goes to meet with him. And I think the chat that they have there and the way he sort of talks about how like, oh no, you're way more emotionally mature about this than you realize. And like, then I would have been at your age. Like and the way he shows her a different way of looking about her grief and her disappointment in herself and the situation. He's like, no, you're doing very well. Like, think about the fact of what you and your friends just went through, and like really clearly lays that out. And I really appreciate how that's done. And then you eventually go to see him. You run into Yoshizawa again outside, who knew him beforehand, had been seeing him previously to him being at the school.
He's already her counselor.
Exactly, yeah. And which for me right now is like, okay, it probably helps to just make these two new characters feel a little bit more like lived in the world as a way to tie them into things. But then he brings you in. You talk. I wrote down, he says that he's not that good, and I'm like, okay, maybe he should talk to someone too. But like, it's a conversation that goes pretty well. And then he also is like, by the way, if you want to help me with my research, that would be great. I've been thinking about how, and it's like, okay,
everybody's sketchy.
Yep. Yeah. Everyone wants this specific teenager's help with all of their like, off book research.
Yeah.
But, then he's obviously talking a lot about like internal versus external thoughts and actions and our personas, for lack of a better term. But overall, it's, I think, a really great introduction for this character.
Yeah. And a key point we kind of breezed over here is also that you do get him as a confidant, right? And the moment when you make a deal with him, right, he'll help you with your mental acuity and you'll come to therapy. And then you make a second deal where he's basically like, if you help me with my experiments, I'll like teach you how to strengthen your mind, which also leads to the funniest another very funny flash forward to Sai interrogating you and being like, you must have had someone who helped you strengthen your mind, didn't you? And it's like, really? He needed that? That was a thing? Goodness. Okay.
Yeah, I love that. She is just so specific in those interrogation scenes. It's wonderful.
Those tropes are great. So you automatically get Maruki to 2, like, really quick. And one thing that's really nice is every time you go and this happens in the second one, every time you go and level up Maruki, you get max 5 SP up for Joker, and you also get a snack item. So they really, really encourage you to go do this stuff. Last week, we had a question about the Persona 5 Royal kind of like extra content at the end, and somebody was asking, okay, how do you trigger this? If you don't want spoilers, skip ahead a little bit, but I'm going to keep this completely spoiler-free in terms of story-wise. What I will say, though, is in order to trigger the extra Royal content later on, make sure you are leveling up Maruki.
Cool.
That's kind of all you need to know. There's some other stuff that I will get to later, but that's the key to it, is make sure you're leveling up Maruki as you go. That's pretty much, if you see him available to hang out, you should probably hang out with him just to be safe, right? Like, they give you a decent amount of time to do all this, but just level up Maruki, and as long as you're leveling up Maruki, don't worry about it.
Cool. That's actually very good to know. They give you a lot of incentive to hang out with him, as you were saying, like the SP and the snacks, in addition to just your confidant bonuses. But it's that is very helpful to know, because you can make a lot of time choices that don't always go your way. So that I will definitely keep that in mind.
So and again, like I said last week, you literally do not have to worry about it as long as you're paying attention to that, basically.
Yeah. Cool. Other than that, moving on to sort of the second half of this week, where we get into essentially we're getting into the next main chapter of Persona 5, and it's the final day of midterms, but you don't have any questions or anything. It's just kind of like a shot in class of you finishing things up. But what's more important about this day is it begins in a strange place where there's someone who An feels like they're being watched. While you're at the train station. And we get a cut to one of the more anime-style cutscenes. And the group is, getting out of the train station. They're aware, and so they sort of make a plan. And it cuts to on the street level, out on the street, just kind of hanging out by herself. And it cuts to a first-person shot of someone, and their hand goes out, and they're just slowly going like that, which is a totally normal way to approach any human being. And then Ryuji and Joker come in and are like, hold on, friend. And it's very like sitcom-y in the way that they do it, and it's wonderful. And then you meet Yusuke, voiced by Matt Mercer. And Yusuke shows up, and, it's obviously like, hey, what are you doing, my dude? Why are you following on? What's going on?
He's such a weirdo.
Very strange, very, very weird introduction, and you're like, oh, it's gonna be gross, like he's probably trying to hit on her in a weird way, because that's typically what you would probably expect of this interaction. And he was following her because he is an artist, and her beauty struck him on an artistic level. And while that sounds like a line, I genuinely, and we're working with a little bit of foreknowledge of Yusuke as a character, it genuinely to me reads as like, this dude is really just thinking about the artwork that he can create.
Yeah, it's, I don't get, and even when I played it the first time, I didn't get any sort of like ill intentions from him in those lines of like, he every time they propose, and maybe this is coming later, but every time that they suggest that maybe he's doing this for like because he wants to date her, he's always like, what are you talking about? Like, you're crazy.
Yeah, it's I was actually talking, and I don't want to like put anyone on the spot, but I was actually talking with someone who is playing along with us, and they were kind of like, is this going into like weird, gross territory? And so I kind of wanted to like set that expectation of like a little bit of foreknowledge of Yusuke. I genuinely don't ever think this is played for romantic intent from his side. I do think like Ryuji, Joker, and especially Morgana, because Morgana wants to protect the love of his life, are like, no man shall come near An. Like, they're very protective in that way, but I don't ever read Yusuke as wanting to be romantically interested. He wants An to model, because he is, he's just obsessed with finding the like perfect painting and to find his creative outlets and all of that. And her beauty struck him, that he left his car and went on to chase her. And as he returns, or as they're having this discussion, someone comes looking for him, and that person is Madarame, a name we've heard before. And so he is Madarame's pupil, essentially, is what we learn throughout all of this. And he is, training to become an artist. They obviously remember hearing a little bit about Madarame, both on the news and as they later remember from Mementos. And it's a strange sort of like introductory interaction, but essentially Yusuke, is this where he offers the invitation? Forgive me, I may be incorrect, but is this where he offers the invitation to the showing?
I believe so,
the art gallery, yeah.
The art gallery is the next day.
Is the next day, yeah. So he offers an invitation to come to the art gallery where Madarame is holding a show. And, obviously after all of this, everyone but An is a little kind of like, we don't trust this guy, but also we should find out more about Madarame. An is willing to give him a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
But Morgana is mostly just upset that anyone would go and threaten An. But of course, we do get a flash forward here, and Sai is extremely surprised that you met one of Madarame's pupils by chance.
Right.
And is very, very upset about that in the flash forward. But otherwise, we essentially, get to this beginning chapter. Is there anything you want to say about sort of that introductory scene with Yusuke? I don't want to blow past it.
I will say, this is going to be a little tricky for me to talk about Yusuke going forward because of the things I already know. Because the first time I played through Persona 5, I hated Yusuke for a really long time.
Yeah.
Like, for multiple in-game months, I think. Like, I really didn't like Yusuke. And so, in hindsight, a lot of the things that he does, I think, are adorable and silly knowing the character, and are just plain weird and creepy not knowing the character. Like, and so, you get the sense of, like, he is very, like, he seems well-intentioned, but also just, like, really weird. And then, meanwhile, Madarame is very, like, from his car, is very, like, jovial and laughing about it, and, like, is kind of lighthearted throughout the entire thing. But, yeah, then you do a midterms day that day that doesn't have any questions, before you get another free evening, before you kind of jumps into this next chapter of things. And this feels like, you know, if the buffet was the epilogue of Kamoshida, this feels like the end of the prologue of Madarame, basically, and now this Sai thing, we are, like, into this chapter of the story.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really great way to put it, especially, and I did want to call out, because you mentioned it, of, like, Madarame is introduced in the car. He's a very, like, happy, as he said, jovial man. Like, he's introduced, he seems very nice. Yusuke adores and worships him. Like, everything about his introduction is... he seems like a good, beloved art man, but obviously there's something more to it. And you as the player know that the characters are starting to have a suspicion, but they don't really have more than a name to go
with. Right, the name they heard from that guy in Mementos,
exactly.
Right? That's kind of the only indication they have right now.
Yeah, and so I think it's a really great, as you said, like, prologue setup for where this next section of the game goes. And I agree with you. I do want to say, just to not let you feel like alone in that, I didn't really love Yusuke. I'll be honest. I liked Yusuke in my first session, if only because I like Matt Mercer, and so I was happy to hear Matt in the game. But, like, I wasn't... I think I agree with you in terms of, like, I am now putting my thought of everything I know about Yusuke's journey into his character, whereas it's very much what he does here, where he's like, your beauty struck me and I had to come chase after you to paint you, is really weird to do to a stranger. Like, it
super
is
strange.
It is extremely uncomfortable and gross to do, and, like, it's no surprise that I think the guys are kind of like, what the hell am I doing? Even if Morgana's reason is because he wants to one day wed on, when he returns to his human form, like, they very much are coming from a, like, this is gross, dude. And, like, that's fair. That is a very fair reaction to have after this stranger comes running up to you like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, you do, as you mentioned, the next day sort of begins the actual chapter of it. You go to Madarame's, art exhibit. An goes off with Yusuke because she had a few extra tickets. You're all able to come along. An essentially...
That intro, by the way, is also one of my favorite Yusuke moments, where he runs up and sees you guys entering, and he goes to An and is, like, super excited. He's like, you came! And then looks at the boys and is like, you really came, huh? Like, just immediately. Like, the way he treats An differently is... again, still kind of weird and gross at this point, but also really funny how much shade he throws the others.
Exactly. He just does not care about the dudes. And again, I totally think it is fair to read that as, like, is he being a creep and, like, just really weirdly into An and is playing, like, he read the game and is trying to figure out how to, like, use his art to, like, get with her.
Right.
But, like, genuinely coming from the place of where we know Yusuke, it's like, no, he just really was like, this potential, like, this will be the secret to my art. She will, like, allow me to, you know, paint the piece that I've always needed to paint. And but it is definitely a weird interaction. I do agree with you. It is really funny when he's like, yeah, you come with me. Yeah, whatever you guys want to do. And Morgana, of course, is really angry. Ryuji is like, whatever. And they're like, let's use this as a chance to get some intel. They overhear Madarame being interviewed. And the thing of note, I think, that they discuss is the people are... the interviewers are like, you're incredibly well known for having so many different styles, but it all comes from one person. How are you able to all do this? And he says they just naturally bubble up. He tries to live a modest life. He is not someone who seeks fame and fortune, though I will say, of course, he was being driven around in a car the day before. It's worth noting. But he lives, as he says, in a modest shack. He's not really trying to live in a mansion or use his fame and fortune to live in excess. And so he tries to live modestly, essentially, and we get a little bit of cut to An and Yusuke looking around at paintings. She specifically points out a painting that she wanted to see, that she was really hoping to see at this exhibit, and mentions how she really notices a sort of like an underlying frustration to it. Yusuke seems a little bothered by this interaction, but doesn't really say too much about it. He kind of just wants to bring her aside and like move her away from it. There's not really too much there. And we sort of get the back and forth of like them sort of looking around at the art, and then Joker and Ryuji essentially getting buffeted away by the crowds.
Yeah. Who are obsessed with Madarame. This is a really interesting setup to the Madarame as a character, right? Because it's basically showing he's super famous. Like, when you're walking around, you can see, like, ads for his art exhibit in Shibuya, right? Yep. Like, he's incredibly well-loved. He seems very humble and kind. His art is prolific, right? Yusuke has a lot of respect for him in sort of deference to him. And for all accounts, like, the art that he has up in his exhibit is good, right? And so, like, I think it's important to kind of get that perspective on him because, again, like you said, you as a player know that this guy is your next target because of the flash forward to Sai. So there's no question about that. But it's good to sort of establish before they get into that, like, okay, this is who this human being is, because you don't have the same sort of personal connection as you did to Kamoshida, where you can see the terror being brought directly upon you.
Yeah, it's we're getting into interesting territory, and I think you totally hit the nail on the head of like we're getting into a place where they are actively seeking out new cases essentially and new things to change, and it's not just a like what's going on in Shujin and how can we fix everything there. It is building up the outward sort of cases and having to do a lot of heavy lifting there to convey everything. But I think it does a really great job at that, especially in this setup. And you eventually see the two of the boys get thrown away. Essentially, they're like, okay, we can't handle this, and end up at the station. And An eventually shows up and is mad that she got abandoned by them. They explain the situation that they got dragged out and everything. But while they're there, and everything that was going on with Madarame, it was a good time to go investigate. And Ryuji notices a post on the metaverse about Madarame and essentially accusations of plagiarizing a pupil's work.
Yes, on the fan site.
Yeah, excuse me, the fan site. Yeah, I don't know. Metaverse. There's a lot of words. Anyway, they notice this, and they're like, this is probably a good thing to ask Yusuke about. But of course, we'll have to get there in a little bit. You get a free evening. I bought the expensive cosmetic set and then just made lockpicks.
Was the expensive cosmetic set the gifts or whatever?
Yeah, the gifts.
It was like $15,000 on the shopping channel. Yeah, I did that one too.
I got suckered in. I don't know if it's.
it's all fool's gold anyway. It's all plated. It's not. And no. Then yeah, I did the same, and then I also watched a movie.
Okay.
I think. Oh no, I watched a movie. I started watching the proficiency movie the evening before, actually, which is called Guy McVer.
Oh my god.
Instead of MacGyver. And it's basically just like the bits, the like voiceover bits of these movies is one of my favorite goofs in this whole game, because they're just so funny and so silly, and they're all like, don't worry, I can fix this car with just a piece of gum and a toothpick, right? Like, it's just like total silly stereotypical MacGyver stuff. So the first evening I did that, and then the second evening I just finished it. Not as much because I needed the proficiency, just more because I like watching those movies in free evenings, and I didn't have enough lockpick materials to make more lockpick stuff. So I figured proficiency was not a bad way to spend it.
I definitely didn't watch movies at home in my first playthrough, but I'm trying to do it a little bit more now. But I did go to the theater a few times, and there's also some there's like a very funny Batman parody that you can see at the theater. You're totally right. It's one of the best sort of ongoing goofs that they have, and even if you don't want to spend like every evening doing those things, I definitely recommend at least watching a movie at home, going to the movies once, like just give it a try, because they can be very funny. Outside of giving you extra points. But anyway, moving on from there,
May 16th. This is our final day of the week.
Final day of the week, and it's not a quiet one. In class.
Well, that's real quick. That's just such a funny thing about this week, right? Is like 4 of the days are just taken over by midterms pretty much, and then these last 2 days are like really packed with getting you into the next storyline.
Yep, Absolutely. And it's with good reason, because there's going to be a lot we're going to be going through in the coming weeks. But on this day, very quickly, of course, worth mentioning, Maruki gives you a class quiz about the placebo effect, I believe, is the topic.
Yes. And also, I love Maruki's music so much. It's so chill. Good. The music that comes up when he's talking is like such a good new addition with Royal too. I mean, not that any of the music really misses, but like, yeah, he definitely. Once we get to sort of a slower week and can do a music deep dive, definitely like character themes and things like that are going to be a lot of fun to talk about. But essentially, this is a big story day to really get us into the meat of the Madarame chapter, and the group decides, as was the choice yesterday, to go ask Yusuke about these sort of plagiarism accusations, because he would be a pupil who might know if his work is getting stolen. On the way there, as you've written, Morgana kind of gets abused on the train. There's like a kid who comes up and is like, "Oh, kitty." And this is such a funny aside. It's such a weird moment, and I love it.
It doesn't, like, as far as I know, it doesn't lead to, like, you can't get points out of it. There's no real, like, purpose. It's just, like, you essentially can kind of annoy Morgana to the extent that you want to. You can, like, really, like, bop on his head to make him make noise. You can give him, like, soft pets. It's kind of up to you. I was nice to Morgana this time. I just, like, lightly pat his head.
The whole deal, right, is that they didn't pay the pet fee, and so they need to, like, hide Morgana, so a kid comes up and sees the cat, and they're like, "It's a stuffed toy, it meows when you pet its head." And, like, yeah, you're given these three options of, like, light pat, hard pat, or button mash.
Yep.
And I have never not picked button mash.
Oh, I did light this time, because I was like, I feel for Morgana. It's a tough situation.
Dude, it's such a fun... it's messed up because they're just, like, bullying Morgana, but it is such a funny reaction when you button mash Morgana's head, and he just has to be like, meow, 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 meow. It's like, it's so good.
It's just this stuffed toy. We can't do anything about it. It's a very funny, sort of weird interaction that just kind of is out of nowhere. You do get a quick cutaway to, as you've written down, the shady SIU director talking about the Shujin incident. Definitely.
Yeah, basically talking about, like, how people can't just have a change of attitude the way that Kamoshida did. I wonder, and that's basically it. It's just sort of like foreshadowing.
Basically just want someone to start looking into the strangeness that happened there. And then we arrive at the Madarame shack. They pretty much just go up to the door and ask Yusuke point blank, and are like, "Hey, you being plagiarized, my dude?" Is essentially like the how this conversation goes, which is, again, I think really emphasizes the point. These are teenagers. They are not private investigators. They are not people trained to do this. They are not good at this.
Yeah. Ryuji talks a lot.
Yeah. He takes obviously enormous offense at this and says it's not true. Like, Madarame is giving him a place to live, is giving him guidance, like he owes his life to him. This is ridiculous accusations. Ryuji is just like, you could be lying though. Like, what about that, man? Huh? It's like, fair point. Not the best way to get someone to admit something, to be like, but what if you're lying?
That's the funniest part about this interaction too, is like, it's so dumb. Ryuji's saying that is so dumb, and it's the one thing that gets Yusuke, like, catches Yusuke off guard. Yusuke is like, "How dare you? This is insane. Why would I ever?" And then Ryuji's just like, "What if you're lying, though?" And Yusuke's like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
It's so silly.
Which, like, fair. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good way to just, like, gut check people. It's like, but what if you're lying? It's a really funny interaction. Throughout it, Yusuke is getting really, really pissed off and sort of mentions how his inspiration from Madarame and everything, and specifically mentions the Sayuri, the piece that inspired him and sort of impresses everyone with its beauty. And he the reason he's had these interactions with you is he saw essentially the sort of same inspiration that he gets, like that same sense of artistic inspiration from that painting. He thought he saw in An when he saw her, and that's why he's wanting to paint her. So he just really, really wants the chance to be able to create the art he thinks he's capable of. It's a bit of a strange interaction, left off on that note. But they sort of realize this potentially could be a palace. Afterwards, they finish that conversation. And he has a palace, but they don't really know how to describe it because they don't know what he would see this as.
This is also a funny moment too, because again, you still know that as a player, this is the guy, but like, they are actually starting to doubt it.
Yep.
Right? They're like, this old dude seems really nice. Like, maybe we're just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, they see the nav has, like, picked up parts of their conversation. And they just have to start guessing about what the palace would be, right?
Yeah, and so you can choose the options, and eventually you settle on museum as the correct guess. And that brings you into Madarame's palace, and the first accidental infiltration begins.
Yeah.
As you get set up to his palace, and you're set up outside of it. There is like essentially just crowds waiting to get in there. It's this incredibly, obviously the shack is a pretty rundown, not great looking building. The palace is this beautifully ornate museum. Like, it is a just modern decadence of a building.
Yeah, solid gold.
Yep. He obviously was just watching Austin Powers Goldmember and decided to make his palace that way. And it's, you're trying to figure out a way to get in because there's security in the form of personas who might attack you if you go in the wrong way. So you find a side route, sneak up to essentially a rooftop to infiltrate through. There's always, of course, those types of rooftops in museums. You can't have a museum without easily accessible infiltration spots in the roof. The gang swoops in, and they get in, and they start to realize there's a lot of paintings of people up on the walls who we learn are Madarame's pupils. And the thing about them that's really strange is that they correct me if I'm wrong, they all seem to be the same style, right?
Yeah, they're all the same style, and they're all like sort of weirdly moving, and there's no artist name and there's no title. There's just the painting of a person and then the name of that person, and it's all his pupils. They find one of Nakanohara, the guy that they met in Mementos, and they also find one of Yusuke, and they're at this point still sort of confused. But then they move a little deeper in. Yeah.
They essentially are seeing this. It's a wing of this museum where the gallery is essentially what you assume are all the pupils he's, stolen from. And we make our way into sort of like the main lobby. You can pick up a map. There's a couple treasure chests there. And then you get into sort of a like big opening area where there's a massive statue there. And forgive me, I did not write the name of the statue down. I know they mention it, or at least like the way they describe it. But essentially, by investigating the statue and sort of getting a sense of everything here, they feel like they have gotten enough evidence to understand that he is a bad guy who is abusing his students and using their work and plagiarizing.
Yeah, the statue is essentially a monument to exactly his crime, right? Like, it's basically that he sees his students, his pupils that live with him as just like basically just his personal artists, right? Mm-hmm. Who just paint stuff and he just takes it from them and he'll abuse them if they don't have good output, and just doing some pretty terrible things according to his own palace. Which he doesn't see as, him abusing them as much as him, like, they are his works of art that he just like uses to farm out his creativity or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the palaces are never quite subtle about the crimes of the people.
No, they're not.
Which is intentional. It's obviously, especially for an artist who's trying to live a modest lifestyle in their pursuit of art. It's fitting that their internal palace is a gaudy monstrosity of gold and showing off how bad they are. But anyway, you all feel like you have enough to sort of go with a basis on the real world for this. But it then does lead to what I think is a really good and interesting conversation to sort of wrap up the week about how they're like, what is our ethical like place in all of this? Do we really have enough standing to actually try to change this man's heart, or to really get into this? Because we don't really know him. We don't know the victims personally. Like, we've met Yusuke, but like, we're not connected to them. This is not necessarily crimes we've seen ongoing. We have not seen things committed. Like, where do we stand, or do we feel like it is correct to step in here? And it's a bit of a weird disconnect because they don't know the victims. And I do like that they bring that up. I do like that this is a conversation they're having, because it is, they are just deciding, hey, we're going to jump in and emotionally change this man we've never met before.
Yeah, that's one of two really good moments in all this. The other one being Morgana basically being like, yeah, we see all this stuff in his palace, but like we need actual evidence before we just like start messing with this dude's heart.
Yep.
And then this other conversation, I agree. I think it's really important that they address the fact that Kamoshida, they were sort of forced into because it was affecting their lives directly. And this is like, well, if Yusuke's his last student, and like maybe this is how he was, but he's not doing this anymore, or like we don't really know, and aren't really the ones being directly affected by it. So what they end up figuring out is like, yeah, we'll let Yusuke decide because he's the one actually affected by this human being. We're just sort of butting in. And I think that's really important because, again, it's showing that they're not going mad with power, right? Yep. The power that they have is incredibly strong and powerful, but they're still putting in these checks on themselves, like it has to be a unanimous decision for our target. We have to see if this makes sense to actually do. And I think that goes a really long way to making sure they stay the good guy.
Yep.
Right? Because there's this line that you can cross when you have like Robin Hood-esque figures of like, okay, so at a certain point, like if you go too far, right, then you're the bad guy suddenly, right? Yeah. And that's like they're calling themselves thieves, yep. Right? So like at what point is that thievery no longer kind of in the moral high ground? And they are very conscious of that and very careful of that. And I think that's really important to making sure that they are always sort of seen as the protagonist, right, through this story.
Yeah, no, you're totally right, and it's a very important distinction that I think keeps the fact of what they're doing, which is very personally invasive, you know, whether or not it's two terrible people, like at the end of the day, it is a thing where they have to sort of like decide where that line is, and them having these conversations, I think, to sort of bring it full circle, also to speak to Maruki's point of like, when he was speaking to An, is like, oh, you're way more emotionally like mature than you give yourself credit for because of the fact
right.
that they are thinking about this, because probably a lot of people their age might just be like, let's just go crazy. Like this is
right.
a lot of power. Let's just see what we can do. Cause it's easy to get caught up in all of that. And so,
sure.
Yeah, to have them have these conversations along the way, I do think are important. And I do think it's a credit to the game being the length that it is that allows it to work as well as it does.
Yeah.
But that pretty much wraps us up for this week as we officially begin work on the Madarame chapter. We'll see where things with Madarame and Yusuke and everything else takes us in the weeks to come. But before we wrap up, we both have a little bit of a quiz for each other. I, of course, have my persona pseudonym for Tom to guess. And we're running out of some early ones, so getting into a new palace will help. But so this one, probably a bit easy, but there's a persona who is referred to as the Gallows Flower. Now, who could that be? The Gallows Flower.
Is that one called... So this is the tricky thing, is a lot of the time I know which one it is visually.
Uh-huh.
I think this one is called Mandrake?
Tom, you were correct.
Yeah!
It is the Mandrake.
Yes, a lot of the time I'll know which one I'm supposed to be thinking about, but yeah, this is going to get harder too.
It is,
because as you get deeper in, there's also like a lot of guys that look similar or like are very similar. Not saying that as a bad thing. It's just like as the persona kind of like, for lack of a better term, evolve and level up in sort of like different ways. There's lines that they can follow, and once we get a bigger pool of those, it's going to be a lot harder.
It is, yeah. I'm looking forward to the later tiers of this. But before we do wrap up, of course, you also have a pop quiz question for us.
Yes, I do. So this one is actually related to one of Ryuji's hangout things. So it could be that some people haven't gotten there yet, but I think that there's a decent chance some people have, or a good amount of people have. And if you haven't, pay attention. Maybe if you're playing, if you get some free time this week and end up hanging out with Ryuji, maybe you can pay attention. So, one of my favorites, Ryuji, being the cool kid that he is trying to start some cool new slang terms. So what's Ryuji's cool new slang? That's your pop quiz for next week.
I remember this moment and thought it was so funny.
It's a very good moment. It's a classic moment, and I couldn't not ask about it.
I appreciate it. And of course, you'll have to leave your answers in the comments on YouTube, or you can write into dornology@gmail.com. That's also where you can send in questions if you have any questions or comments about either this week's events or the week that we're going to be talking about in next week's episode. So please let us know. And of course, wherever you're listening or watching this show, please consider, if you're enjoying it, leaving a like, a subscribe, a review, the stars, whatever your platform of choice uses to let us know you're liking the show. We do really appreciate it, and sincerely, it helps a ton for other Persona fans to be able to find it. So please consider that if you do. Otherwise, you can find Tom and myself on Twitter. Tom is at Tom R. Marks, and I am at JM Dornbush. But as per usual, it's getting pretty late, and Morgana is telling us to go to sleep. So that is.
Hey, that actually happened this week.
It did. It actually happened, and it's not going to happen every week. So we'll probably have to find out some other silly ways to end this. But we're glad you took some of your time this week to hang out with us, and we'll see y'all next week on Take Your Time.
So long.